Hi, everybody. It is 4 o'clock in the Central Time Zone, 5 o'clock on the East, and we welcome you to the special edition of Saints Tonight, the social media streaming version. I'm Victor Howell, along with our Super Bowl champ, Scott Shanle, and the man in the middle, our Saints insider, Mike Nabors. Of course, we're joining you because of the bombshell news that really broke about 3 hours ago. The press conference still going on right now in New Orleans, just about to wrap up. And that's the fact that after 16 years with the franchise, 15 years on the sideline, of course, suspended for one season, head coach Sean Payton, no longer head coach of the New Orleans Saints, announcing today that it's time for him to step away. He did not rule out coaching once again, but he says he doesn't want to coach next year. Of course, there have been all sorts of rumors about him jumping in the media. But, guys, we have assembled the news team, as they say, to talk about this, because when we all last met, we were talking about the Saints finishing up in Atlanta and then running into the locker room to see if the Rams could take care of business, which they didn't, and it put an end to the season. I don't know that any of these rumblings and rumors had started back then, and all of a sudden where you saw smoke became an inferno, and it all came to a head an hour ago. So, Scott, he's your former coach. Let me start with you. What was your initial reaction? I guess maybe first when you first started hearing rumors that maybe Sean Payton may be going to the media, hey, is he leaving, to all of a sudden, I'm gone.
Yeah, I think when I heard the rumors that he could possibly go into the media, I was happy for him, because I think that's a role. If anybody watched John Gruden do ESPN Monday Night Football, I think it's a role that Coach Payton would be great in. I think it would be an opportunity for him to show his personality to the entire nation, a side of him that a lot of people don't see until today's press conference. So if it meant him going to the media, I was happy for him. Appreciate all the time he spent. But when the news actually came out today, I was shocked, saddened. Shocked and saddened, I would say, would be those things. Saddened for the city of New Orleans, everything he's done for the city, meant to the city. Sad for the future players and the current players that he had opportunity to work with. And, you think things are going to last forever, but when you sit there and think about it, 16 years is a really long time. And if his heart's not into it, as a fan, you probably don't want a coach who is questioning whether or not he should be there. So I think he's doing the right thing for himself. I think he's doing the right thing for the organization, as hard as that is to say.
Mike, you were there at his last press conference there in Atlanta when he addressed trying to take care of business, doing all they could do. Then he'd put it in the hands of another team. And Scott and I have been commenting over the last several weeks about a different type of Sean Payton in the press conferences, going back to the one, it may have been the Miami Dolphins debacle when you had next to nobody out there. And Scott even said that was one of his better press conferences because he didn't blow up at anybody. He realized the situation. It seemed a more humble, sort of down to earth. And right before we came on here, you were telling Scott and I, that looks like the real Sean Payton. Your impressions of his announcement and your reaction to the announcement that he will no longer be Saints head coach.
Well, we all started this back in 2006, the same time a guy by the name of Sean Payton started with the New Orleans Saints. And I felt kind of guilty because I just started covering the team at that point and had heard all the stories about the Mike Ditka years and the bags over your heads and all that. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Sean Payton wins right away in 2006 and is going to be a legend forever in the city of New Orleans for what he did to turn a franchise from where it was to where it is today, where the expectations are very high. He said it during his press conference. I mean, if you're at the age of 25 or even 22 or under, all you know is success with the New Orleans Saints. Drew Brees is a big part of that, but Sean Payton is too. And you mentioned the press conferences this year, Victor. I remember the Nashville game when they lost to the Titans. I haven't seen Sean Payton that frustrated, not only this season, but in a long, long time. And I thought it was interesting during the press conference. He mentioned regrets. And one of his regrets was the way he treated the media his first maybe 6 years in the NFL. In recent years, he's given us ice cream for Christmas. We appreciate that. It's a kinder, gentler Sean Payton in many ways. And I thought in today's press conference, there's a lot of layers to a lot of head coaches. They can't be our friends all the time. They can't be the players' friends. They like the media, at least some members of the media. They love all their players for the most part, but they can't be that guy. Sean Payton, it was almost as if it was, I could be myself today. This is me. And you really felt that. And we've seen glimpses of that. Shanley's seen it more than me. But Sean Payton is a real fun guy to be around. He's not your average head coach. He has a lot of interest. He hangs out with Kenny Chesney and Jimmy Buffett. And I think we saw the full Sean Payton platter in this press conference. I'm surprised but not shocked. I mean, this was a tough year. I think besides 09, besides 06, definitely his best year as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, from the evacuation to the COVID outbreaks. I mean, we just heard all the Buccaneer injuries this past weekend. Well, they weren't missing their starting quarterback, right, their number one running back for a month, their number one wide receiver for the whole year, and the bulk of their offensive line. That's what Sean Payton had to deal with. and he almost made the playoffs with all that. It had to be exhausting, but I thought it was really cathartic just listening to Payton today and how natural. And it was really the real Sean Payton in a lot of ways.
Yeah. By the way, if you're joining us, we're glad you're joining us on our social media channels. If you have something you'd want to ask or a comment, like Kevin Wagner, you saw a comment just a moment ago. Kevin watching us says, not really surprised, but not many people expected he would be in New Orleans for 16 seasons. Good for him. Wish him the very best. Feel free to send a comment and we'll try to get it on here. We're with you for the next 15 to 20 minutes here on our social channels. Scott, as Mike was mentioning, if for folks who did not see the press conference streaming from the New Orleans Saints facilities, he took a long time, 35 minutes before he finally started taking questions. He thanked everybody. Started with Mickey Loomis. Of course, he went to Mrs. B. He talked about former coaches, and he talked about former players and everybody that came with him. And I thought it was interesting. We were happy personally because we heard the Scott Shanle shout out as well. But he took us through the timeline of what it meant to him for people who said, let's go. To New Orleans. You just got, we had the unbelievable devastation with the hurricane. He's a Bill Parcells guy. He was in Dallas. We know all about what the franchise, the Cowboys mean to the NFL. But I wanted to ask you from a player's point of view, because you were one of the ones that came, as Mike just mentioned. And I'm a New Orleans native. I grew up in New Orleans. My parents were at the first game at Tulane Stadium. Sean said he's heard 100,000 people there were now. And of course, it never sat nearly that much. But I lived through the years of bags over your head. I was there when, if it wasn't for Shoetown and Pizza Hut, that was back in the day, the blackout had to be listed by 12 noon or you don't see the game. And Shoetown and Pizza Hut saved the Saints for getting on the broadcast. You buy a pair of shoes. Hey, how many tickets you want? You want to go to the game. It went from that to now like a 30,000, 40,000 person waiting list to get season tickets for the Saints. And of course, all the success that you all had. But specifically to that point that he was talking about players and coaches joining him, you were one of those players. What was that like, buying into the Sean Payton that you knew in Dallas and saying, you know what, I'll go to New Orleans. I'll give this a shot.
Well, I'll tell you what, there are a lot of layers to that. First of all, I was extremely grateful that he made that trade for me and helped. I don't know where my career would have been without Sean Payton believing in me and making that trade and allowing me to become part of the New Orleans Saints, because Dallas Cowboys, they drafted DeMarcus Ware. DeMarcus Ware is a Hall of Famer. I wasn't going to quite fit into the defense in Dallas. So he made that trade. I'm not going to lie to you. When I got traded, they said, you're jumping on a plane to go to Jackson, Mississippi. I had no idea where Jackson, Mississippi was. Never been there. I didn't know it could get that hot in the United States when I went there to training camp. I'll tell you that. So I get to Jackson. I'm there for a couple of weeks. We get beat down by Peyton Manning severely in a preseason game. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, we're not going to win a game this year. It's going to be a long year. Get on a bus, go to New Orleans. First time I've ever been to New Orleans. And this is right after Hurricane Katrina. And I remember calling my wife and saying, there's no restaurants open, that things are boarded up. There's drywall outside of people's homes. And I couldn't believe the devastation that had still been there from Katrina. You see it on the news, but being there in person didn't do it justice. And I think the moment you got there that year, and we assembled a great group of guys, we started off the season fast. We beat Cleveland, beat Brett Favre in Green Bay. And you quickly realize, man, we're a bunch of guys that nobody wanted. We have something to prove. Just like the city and the region has something to prove to people, that we will come back. And I think that's why you heard Coach Payton talk so much about that 06 season. He references us as the Junction Boys. We went to Jackson, Mississippi, had a tough training camp. And I think he takes a lot of pride. Outside the Super Bowl season, he takes a lot of pride in the 06 season, just like we all do. We were a bunch of cast-offs, but we played for something bigger than football. Making the NFC Championship game, being a few minutes away from making a Super Bowl in 06. Nobody expected that out of us, and it put us on the map. It put New Orleans on the map, and I tell people all the time, there's no other place I would have rather won a Super Bowl, because nobody else, no other fan base would appreciate a Super Bowl the way New Orleans Saints fans appreciate a Super Bowl. You guys reference those tough years that everybody went through. People crying in the stands, saying their grandparents, their fathers, never thought they'd see the day the Saints would win a Super Bowl. That is rare. That doesn't come with a lot of fan bases. So that's why I tell people there's no other place I would have rather won a Super Bowl than with the New Orleans Saints.
Well, with that celebration, one of my favorite moments of our CST years before the network went to sleep for good and we moved over to Your View back in October was watching my boy Mike get on the float. Paul Crane and I are hosting the parade coverage. Of course, Scott, you're on the float celebrating. And I kept saying, get Mike on the float. Get Mike on the float. He would love it. Get him on the float. And sure enough, he gets on the float for Muses, and he keeps going until he's out of microphone range. I mean, he's interviewing on the float. And if you remember, you win. Mike's out there doing interviews. You're celebrating on the field. There were no cars overturned. There were no fires set. There was no damage. It was just like hurricanes for everybody. They've been waiting this long to have something to celebrate. And Mike, Scott just mentioned it. I know you've been on the field since all this started in 06 and at all these press conferences. Sean set quite the pace, winning his first game in Cleveland as a head coach with the Saints. And then before you know it, they're having a chance to get to the NFC Championship, go to the Super Bowl right out the gates, before we finally saw that magical Super Bowl season. You talk about setting the bar high. That's something Sean Payton certainly did right out the gates as head coach.
It was so exciting to be a part of it right when Sean Payton got there. That's when we started doing our Saints shows. And, we did the preseason games. And my daughter's 16 years old. All she knows is me covering Sean Payton and the New Orleans Saints. That's how long Payton's been the head coach in New Orleans. I'll never forget our first production meeting before the first preseason game. Shanle wasn't even on the team yet. They hadn't acquired him from Dallas. That's how crazy that preseason was. But Tim Brando was doing the games, and he and I sat with Sean Payton. Sean Payton brings out the depth chart, and he's really not knowing what he has at that point. He knew Jeff Faden was a solid guy on that offensive line in the middle of it, but didn't know about Jari Evans. Did point to a guy on the depth chart. This guy has looked good so far, a guy by the name of Marcus Colston, but he was just learning. He didn't know what he had in 06. So to go from that point to then picking up Scott Shanle and Mark Seminole, the three linebackers didn't play together until the regular season started. They looked awful in that preseason, really, really bad. And then they go all the way to the NFC Championship game in 2006. Speaks a lot for Sean Payton. He won Coach of the Year, deservingly so that season. But to predict the ride that he would have, the photographer that I worked with, Darren DeQuano, that first season in 2006, texted me and asked me if I'm surprised. I said, I'm not sure how I feel right now, but if you would have told us back in 2006 that Sean Payton would still be here in 2021, 2022, I don't know if I would have been on board with that, but it just shows you what a special ride it's been. We've rehashed the Drew Brees era, but now we're going to talk about Sean Payton. And I'm going to go back to this. I hear this all the time. What if Drew Brees would have gone to Miami? It would have changed the landscape. Nick Saban never would have gone to Alabama. Who knows what would have happened to Sean Payton? I'll say this. Drew Brees wouldn't have had the career he would have had without Sean Payton. It was the perfect marriage. It was great for both men. They will be legends in New Orleans forever. And I think, talking to them both, they were better for it in many ways that he didn't go to Miami. And people in Tuscaloosa would agree too. But I'll always say that Sean Payton wouldn't have been the same without Drew Brees. Drew Brees wouldn't have been the same without Sean Payton.
Sean certainly spent a lot of time, as I mentioned, reflecting on his comments, and you'll be able to see highlights of that and repeat them. But we want to share some of our experiences. We have a question for you in just a second. Kevin has also sent in a question. Scott, we want to get your opinion. But before we jump to it, and that's about moving ahead, I wanted to ask you about the motivational side, because you've talked to us, you and I, when we were on the set, would talk about games the Saints had no business being in, and they would win, or they would come pretty damn close to winning in a game when they were either outmanned or they were missing a million pieces. And you used to talk about Sean Payton not only as a coach but as a motivator. People might think, that kind of comes with the territory, but not every coach, I guess, can motivate like Sean Payton did, because you would always bring up certain angles that you would see. Explain to people who are joining us just why that impressed you so much.
Well, I was asked this earlier about Coach Payton's favorite sayings or things to motivate. And I said, Coach Payton, he doesn't have any sayings. I mean, that's the thing that makes him remarkable is he motivates in different ways. He knows when to say things, how to say things, at what point to say things. And it's not a recycled thing. So that's why he doesn't have sayings where it's generic. Whereas a player I was there for 7 years, and I didn't sit there and say, well, here it comes again. He found ways to keep things fresh and interesting. And I think that's what separates him from the other motivators that I've been around as a coach. He's not a big rah-rah guy, but he just knows what to say, when to say it. He comes in the room, he'll create an analogy, something to get you motivated for that week. He has things where he's always saying, don't take the cheese. Don't let the media tell you how great you're playing. And there would be little pieces of cheese out through the facility, or it's a trap game. There's mouse traps hanging from the ceiling throughout the facility. Or if you're an older player and he wants to motivate you, he would say, hey, do you have any more gas left in the tank? There'd be empty gas cans sitting in your locker. Do we need to sign a young guy? You have no more gas left. So he found different ways to do things. And it was, coaches have different styles, but his style was true and authentic. And the one thing about a player, players will sniff out if it's fake. Players will sniff out if the coach isn't being who he really is. And I think that's the one thing about Coach Payton is he's always been authentic with the players inside that building. He's going to be truthful with you. It may hurt your feelings, but he's going to be honest with you. And I think to Mike's, I'll allude to what Mike said earlier, is we got to see the Coach Payton, the true Coach Payton today, more of his personality. As a player, there were a lot of times where I'm like, man, this guy, come on, give me a break, just breathing down your neck. But then as soon as I retired and I bring my kids to games, you saw a completely different side of him, And I think I always appreciated Coach Payton as a player, but I loved Coach Payton when I retired. And I think that's the difference is I was able to separate those two things as a player and then as a retired player.
Mike, being in all the games that you have been with being our Saints insider for all these years, I know you've seen the angry Sean Payton, you've seen the mediocre Sean Payton, but as we look back on it, would it be fair to say that maybe your favorite moment was Sean Payton and Jimmy Buffett with the trophy as you're live on TV, or was there another Sean Payton memory? And you were always one-on-one with Drew Brees, maybe not so much with Sean Payton, but is there a memory that stands out for you over the last 15 years of him on the sideline?
This is the easiest question I'm going to be asked by Victor Howell because no question it was the Jimmy Buffett moment, but it kind of, I'll come off of what Shanle said. This just showed the true Sean Payton. I mean, Sean Payton, of course, has to be that head coach, the tough guy with the media and with the players. But after they won the NFC Championship game on their road to winning the Super Bowl, we have to kill time outside the locker room. And sometimes we're talking back and forth. But during that circumstance, Jimmy Buffett, Sean Payton's friend. Now, for those Saints fans who don't know this, back before they reconfigured the Superdome, Sean Payton would have a VIP tent right adjacent to the Saints locker room. You never know who you would see in that. I've seen Brett Favre. I've seen Vince Vaughn, all kinds of celebrities. On that day, Jimmy Buffett just walks up. It was like some weird dream you have. He's holding a margarita walking up to me. And I said, Jimmy, can I get you real quick? Mike Nabors, Cox Sports Television. Blankety blank, yeah. And he walks up. And I say, I'm a big fan of yours. I grab the margarita, put it on top of the monitor. He joins me. That would have been fine. They bring up a newspaper, Saints going to the Super Bowl. We're all excited. Halfway through the interview, Sean Payton walks up out of the blue. I didn't even know he was around.
Yep.
Kisses Jimmy Buffett and brings in the NFC Championship trophy. And all he wanted to talk to was Buffett. But then he humored me and answered a few questions. He wasn't feeling good. He had borderline flu, but he hung around. But to be a part of that, that was the best moment I've had in television. It was television live gold.
Yep.
And it really, added to our post-game show. But it also showed, how many head coaches, are buddies with Jimmy Buffett and Kenny Chesney and would do that after the biggest win of his life.
If I remember, Mike, if I remember correctly, wasn't Payton screaming at him when he's going, "This is the original Who Dat. He's an original Who Dat," like screaming at you. I remember you doing an interview and you were shocked, and then it's like, "Whoa, what are you yelling at me for?" But Payton was so into that moment with the trophy and you and Jimmy standing there and started screaming how he was an original Who Dat for the Saints.
Absolutely. I will say this about Sean Payton. It was never boring, guys. It was never, ever boring. Yeah. Win or lose, the way he would call plays, the way he would take chances. And, I know he's a Bill Parcells guy, but he's also a John Gruden guy. He's been around a lot of head coaches. I'm going to say this. There is no head coach in NFL history exactly like Sean Payton. And we've seen his tree now develop around the NFL too. Dennis Allen is likely going to take over. I would think so for the New Orleans Saints. We can talk about that. But there's nobody ever like Sean Payton have an onside kick to begin the second half of a Super Bowl. How many times would it be fourth down in a football game? Oh, Payton's going to go for it. And oftentimes he would get it. I remember when we had our show with Drew Brees back in August, we all gave him our favorite memories. One of my favorite memories of Drew was I didn't care on third down, the down and distance. I felt like the Saints had a chance. But Sean Payton was a big part of that because he's calling the plays. I tell you what, man. A lot of ups and downs in his tenure. It was never boring.
No, well, I was just going to say, to Mike's point, think that there's only one Sean Payton. Only Sean Payton could have a retirement press conference, take a shot at the Cincinnati Bengals for their chant, being a ripoff, and also tell everybody we're rooting against the Rams because they didn't complete the task. That's in his retirement press conference. Right. Oh, by the way, we're gonna show Freeman for the Falcons. We're going to do a choking gesture during a game after they win the Super Bowl. There's only one Sean Payton.
And in his press conference mentioning, Tampa Bay might have won it, but we still beat them twice. He stuck that one in there as well. Probably the only thing he didn't mention is he was 21-9 against Atlanta, but we all know we've dominated Atlanta with Sean Payton at the head coach. Certainly the onside kick in the Super Bowl is the gutsiest call ever in Super Bowl history to this point that helped, the Saints and Shanle win that trophy. But we talked about moving on. Mike, you're just talking about Drew Brees, and we thought maybe finding the new starting quarterback was going to be the biggest move in the offseason. Well, obviously the Saints have something else on their plate. So let's go back because Kevin once again sent in this question. Scott, have heard a lot of names on the, quote, possible new coach list for the Saints. Would love to hear Scott's take on who might be a good fit. And with that, I bring that up now because you kind of tail off of what Mike just said. A lot of people might answer that question by saying it kind of has to be Dennis Allen, doesn't it? He was supposed to be in Chicago interviewing. I know New Orleans media, people on social media, on Twitter said Dennis Allen is here, at the presser.
Yeah.
We saw what he did when there was no Sean Payton going up against Tampa Bay. We know about the defense, and we know that he's had previous head coaching stints. But what he's done as of late with this defense and in the black and gold, do you answer Kevin's question almost with the question? It's got to be Dennis Allen, right?
Absolutely. It has to be Dennis Allen. Dennis has been a coach before. Obviously, he was with the Raiders. It was a tough couple of years, but it's the Raiders. I mean, it's a tough couple of years for a lot of coaches with Oakland. He has that experience. He stepped in one of the most dominating games I've ever seen against Tom Brady on the road, got a shutout as the interim head coach during that game. I think it has to be Dennis Allen for the reasons I just listed, and because of the culture that you have in New Orleans. There is a culture set in place. And if it's not Dennis Allen or somebody already in the building, I think you're going to have a lot of disappointed guys in that locker room, because what they have there, well, there's not a whole lot of teams that have culture or a functional organization. The Saints have that. It has to be somebody within that building. And I think if it is somebody inside that building, my preference would be Dennis Allen. It'll give this group of guys who do come back a ton of confidence that, hey, Coach Payton's not here, but we're still the same Saints.
And he can certainly make it his own. You've got Pete Carmichael, who could be calling plays and up his offensive responsibilities to keep some of what they've set up there as a base, but also keep some of that continuity with names. We also can't finish this off without mentioning as well. And Mike, I'll get your reaction first, because Scott's in Dallas. He might give a different perspective, but there was a huge story printed today that this almost happened a few years ago, where Jerry Jones was ready to make the move to get Sean Payton. All of a sudden, the rumors started coming about that he might go media. Jerry Jones didn't like the way the Cowboys got eliminated. Do you get rid of McCarthy? Oh, wait a minute. All of a sudden now Sean Payton is leaving. Joe Trahan, who's the anchor at WFAA, a former New Orleans media guy, said, did the first shoe just drop as soon as the announcement came with Payton stepping down, meaning is there a role going to Dallas? I don't think it can happen this year without Dallas First, you got to get rid of McCarthy. Then you got to compensate the Saints in some way. But Sean left it open, Mike, that he might be coaching. But what I noticed he didn't say was, I might want to return to coaching in New Orleans. So here's his break. Let me start with you, since you're not in Dallas, and then we'll get Scott's take. Does Sean Payton get back on the sideline? And if so, does he return to where he was an assistant coach and at some point be the new head coach of the Cowboys?
I think there's no doubt Sean Payton's going to coach again. I like the things that he said in his press conference that were very revealing to me, that he wasn't burned out. He just needs a break. And I don't know how long that break will be. I think the interesting thing about the Dallas Cowboys job, when he seriously flirted with them, or there were all the reports last time, his kids were younger. He went through a divorce, and they lived in Dallas part-time, and they would go back and forth. But his kids are both in college now, so I don't think that's as big a factor. I also want to know that Bill Parcells factor. He coached with Jerry Jones. He knows the demands that Jerry Jones puts on coaches in terms of control. And that he's going to be in his ear about that. Yep. But I think Sean Payton also likes the challenge of going somewhere like in New Orleans, where they haven't won in a long, long time, and to be that guy that can turn them around. He's already, set the blueprint for a winning franchise, especially if he gets the right quarterback. He knows that he can get it done. And in Dallas, man, you have it all. You have Dak Prescott. You have a lot of talent on both sides of the football. I just don't know the Jerry Jones factor with Sean Payton. Can he overcome that? Can he work that out? But I think there's no question he's going to coach again. He's still very young, guys. I mean, you look, this to me shows how amazing Bill Belichick is Payton's the second longest tenured coach in the NFL. Bill Belichick keeps going and going and going. I think Sean Payton, you could hear it in his voice, how he likes to teach, how he likes relationships with players, with people. He's not going to fully let that go. He may need a break for a little while, get a TV job. He's definitely going to be a coach. But the Cowboys, I'm not sure about that.
Scott, a lot of people have not been able to push Jerry Jones aside. If anybody's got the credentials to do so, it's Sean Payton, because all he has to say is, look at the numbers that I ran on offense. You're complaining about paying a $140 million quarterback, $100 million receiver, $90 million running back, and you haven't produced. Look at what I can do. I don't know if he can get Jones to get out of the way, but he certainly has the credentials to do it. I don't know the last time a Dallas sportscast led off with news about the New Orleans Saints, Scott, but that might happen tonight here in just a couple hours with where you are. What are you hearing there, and what are your thoughts about Sean maybe returning to coaching there at AT&T Stadium?
Well, I'm telling you right now, for the past 5 years, every Dallas Cowboy fan walks around here hoping and praying every offseason that Sean Payton will end up being their coach. They all think it's going to happen. And, I have a lot of fun with Cowboys fans, because when they struggle, the Saints are doing well. I give them how about them Cowboys, question mark. And it drives them crazy. I'm kind of torn. I think Coach will come back. I think he needs to get refreshed. I think it is out of the Bill Parcells playbook, where you have to refresh. You have to keep things fresh to keep you going. And this is probably going to do that. Now, do I want to be the coach for the Dallas Cowboys? I'm torn because I'm 15 minutes away from that facility where Coach Payton will be coaching America's team. It would kind of be not necessarily a bucket list thing for him, but it's kind of, you're coaching America's team. You're working for Jerry Jones. Nobody's had success since Jimmy Johnson. You take that job. First of all, Jerry Jones is going to make you probably the highest paid coach ever in the NFL to take that job. And now you have a chance to win a Super Bowl for the Dallas Cowboys, which nobody's been able to do. So it's a huge challenge, even though, like I said, they're considered America's team. Everybody tunes in. They haven't won anything. So it's a big, big challenge for him. I do think if he does come back, that would probably be the job he took.
It'll be interesting to watch. And Mike, as we get ready to wrap up, what a wild time right now in the NFL. After such a crazy weekend of these games that all went down to a field goal, you now have 9 head coaching jobs open in the NFL. Tom Brady is gone from the playoffs. We don't know if we're going to see him again. Aaron Rodgers, we don't know if he wants to go back to Green Bay. He might find his way to Tampa to take the place of Tom Brady if he decides to leave. Atlanta's still a hot mess, and now the Saints have to find a starting quarterback and a new head coach.
The NFC South. I mean, Sean Payton touched on it. What about all these? If Tom Brady retires, the Bucs are going to be looking for a quarterback. The Saints are kind of looking for a quarterback.
Yep.
The Falcons are having all kinds of issues, and so are the Carolina Panthers. I mean, this has gone from one of the tougher divisions in the NFL to lots and lots of question marks. I think on a day like today, you appreciate longevity in the NFL. You appreciate the Drew Breeses. You appreciate the Sean Paytons. You appreciate the Tom Bradys, because you know what? It's a not-for-long league. Scott Shanle obviously was an outlier playing in the league as long as you did, Shanle. So, I think today is a celebration of Sean Payton because, man, we talk about all the changes in the NFC South. He was there for 15 years, a long, long time. And I think, when he started in 06 and he wanted that Packers job and then he got hired by the New Orleans Saints, even then, I think somebody would have told him, given that all the things he's heard from Parcells over the many years, that you'd still be here in 2021, now 2022, I think he would have shook your head if you would have mentioned that to him. So, I just got to say kudos to Sean Payton in so many ways. It was a pleasure just covering the evolution of the New Orleans Saints from 06 to now and everything in between. And I'll say it again, it was never, ever boring. No,
it was a heck of a ride. And as many people as Sean thanked at his press conference, Scott, I want to give you the last word because you played for him for all those years. You carried the Lombardi with him as your head coach. You rode the streets of New Orleans in a parade because of him and celebrated your career in New Orleans. He named a lot of players, including you. Here's your chance of a former player to say something to Sean Payton as he steps down as Saints head coach today.
Well, I'm going to reach out to him personally, and I'm going to thank him. And I've done it already, but now that his time in New Orleans has come to an end, I think it's fitting that I thank him again. He allowed me. I didn't know where my career was going to go. I had no idea I'd play 10 years. And I don't know if that would have happened had he not believed in me and made that trade and brought me in, allowed me to be the starting linebacker for the New Orleans Saints, win a world championship, have 2 of my 3 kids born there. New Orleans will always be a second home, and it feels like home to this day. And I'm lucky I get to work with you guys and cover this team and follow this team. And I look at it, I told you guys, when I played with Coach Payton, I appreciate him. I knew he was a heck of a coach. But my love for Coach Payton grew when I was done playing because I saw a different side of him. We spoke in a different light. And, just as an example, when I came to the Seattle Seahawks game, the Saints, I think it was a couple years after I retired, brought my family in. And he's like, if you're coming in, you're sitting in my suite. Put us up in the suite. Sat with his brother, with his family, his wife, Skylene. And it was an awesome experience. Go down to the locker room. And it was the first time my kids had met Coach Payton when they weren't just babies, toddlers. And I'll never forget, he looked at him and he said, you know what, your dad was a great player. He was a great man. He was accountable. This is what he was like as a teammate. I loved coaching him. And that moment, I thought, man, I was more than just a number to him. I was more than just a 5'8". And I think that moment, I appreciated everything he did for every single one of us players. And from that player's aspect, he brought mature men in. He built the locker room the right way. And he always said, I'm going to put together the best 53. And it's not going to be the most talented 53. It's going to be the right 53. And he did. He brought guys in who loved working together, who loved the game of football, weren't getting in trouble outside of facility. And so because we were able to have success, that was a heck of a run and a lot of fun. But it made it even better because of the people we were able to do it with.
Well, it's a great way to put a cap on this after the big news of Sean Payton stepping down and Gee, I wonder, guys, what we'll have to talk about on our first edition of Saints Game Day 2022. You think we'll have a little bit of news on to talk about? It's the big news out of New Orleans. Once again, Sean Payton steps down after 16 years with the franchise, 15 years on the sideline as head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Now we wait and see what Gail Benson and Mickey Loomis and company will do to find a head coach, and then they'll start addressing the roster and all. Guys, I know we were all doing a lot of different things when this news broke a few hours ago. Thanks for taking the time, as always, to join us. And to everybody watching, we thank you. And don't forget, as news continues to develop with the Saints, we'll come right back here on all of our social media channels and keep you updated. But for our Saints insider, Mike Nabors, and our Super Bowl champ, Scott Shanle, I'm Victor Howell. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to keeping you up with Saints news right here on the CST and Your View social media channels. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.